Welcome back to the Poor Sports Podcast. First one of the new year. By the way, I had plans to record them over the last couple of weeks. I did not take an official podcast break, but man, whirlwind of negative events occurred. Probably one of the most challenging breaks I've ever had. I'll be honest with you. So my kids were sick. I had a party that was scheduled on December 23rd at our house with just a bunch of comics to come over to my house. That got canceled because my kids were sick. I did a show on the 22nd that actually it pushed forward the meeting with my in-laws. The day before that, we had done another Christmas thing. We were supposed to be going through this Christmas marathon of stuff. So we canceled the Festivus party, the December 23rd party. And then it was just a whirlwind of shit. I'll tell you this. First off, at my in-laws party on the 21st, I found out that my friend Mark Burkhart had passed away. And I want to talk about him briefly. I don't want to bring everyone's mood down, but Mark was a good friend of mine. And he and I actually took broadcasting classes together for a short amount of time. I mean, not that short, though, like a year. He and I co-hosted a morning show on KGRG FM at Green River Community College. And he was a really fun dude, a really unique guy, a guy that would my friend Matt Mikolas, who's also friends with Mark, brought up a good or made a great description of Mark, which is that he challenged you all the time, and but sometimes, by the way, it was infuriating. Like Mark was not a guy who was like. I think I'm kind of like him, by the way, where it's like he was a bit of an acquired taste. And then he's like, a guy that I just loved for a long time. A real good friend of mine passed away in his mid-50s. And yeah, very sad. Very, very sad news to receive. And just a guy who, by the way, like without Mark, maybe I'm not doing this podcast for good or for bad. He and I had a brief podcast that we were an interesting combination as friends, I would say, because he's like not super into sports and I'm not super into music, and the other is like the polar inverse. And so we got along really well, and we talked a lot of trash, and we would have a lot of fun. Just from the moment I met him, we were like at each other's throats in the way that like comics are. I would say that to some degree he had like a comics mentality. Real quickly, I just want to make sure that I'm recording through the right things. And I had this echo cancellation on. Somewhere up there, Mark is criticizing my broadcasting talent right now. Yeah, it was very sad way to start the break. And then I wouldn't say it got worse, but on the 24th, Christmas Eve, we went to my uncle-in-law's house, and he's got some health concerns also that I guess because it's his private business, I'm not going to say exactly what they are, but let's just say that him getting sick would not be great. And then we left, and 2 days later we found out that he had gotten COVID. It seems like things are okay there, but then my entire side of the family my wife's entire side of the family who was at that party also got COVID. Somehow we did not, allegedly, I would say. I started to feel really sick on December 26th, and I preemptively was like, hey, not sure if I can do my shows with Josh Firestein. Josh, I was going to pick him up at the airport. I'm like, hey man, you might need to find another, a ride home from the airport. And I slept for like 14 hours. I did that at like 7 o'clock the night before. I slept for like 14 hours, woke up feeling terrible, ended up missing both those shows. I did finally do a show with Chris Frangiola at the club New Year's Eve, a guy who I worked with in Appleton, Wisconsin. Very funny comic, by the way. Thank you for the guest spot, Chris, who definitely will not hear this, by the way. Is definitely not the kind of guy who was out there listening to a Seattle sports podcast by a comedian that he worked with, or twice, actually. We've worked together twice, and then this guest spot. But thank you for the guest spot. I got to meet the folks that he has open for him regularly. That was pretty cool. They were nice people. And anyways, not to get too deep into like all my personal shit, but I also found out that my dad had been hospitalized with a serious health condition, And for listeners that don't know, my dad and I have been estranged for over a year. So it's complicated. It's a complicated time to be Casey McLean, I would say. I'm feeling better. Kids are getting better. My wife's feeling better. We never tested positive for COVID. I tested multiple times. Because the symptoms that I had and the people I had been around testing positive for COVID, I treated it exactly like COVID. I'm not here to tell you how to deal with your life. What I'm telling you is I had all the hallmark COVID symptoms, and I tested negative twice. And I don't know how. I was certain it was going to come back positive. So I treated it as though I had COVID. And now I feel quite a bit better. By the way, if you're listening to this, the day it comes out on Friday, tomorrow I will be hosting for Gabe Rutledge at Tacoma Comedy Club. There's been a whirlwind of illness and substitutions at these comedy clubs. So it went from I was supposed to feature a bunch of stuff. I was trying to feature for Gabe, didn't work out that I would get it. Wasn't going to be there for the weekend, and now didn't feature. Going to go to that. Blah 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 blah. It's an absolute whirlwind and shit show in the world of comedy right now. By the way, one of the funniest things that's happened over this, and I think I laughed so hard that I got into a coughing fit, is when it was the Notre Dame. Who did Notre Dame play in their first game of the college football playoff? Shane Gillis was a guest college game day host, and he was talking about people paying players and called Nick Saban Alabama Jones because he was wearing like an Indiana Jones hat, and it was maybe the funniest thing that's ever been said on a sports broadcast. And that includes, by the way, when Reese Davis said, let a naysayer know, which was another very funny moment, by the way. Okay, so you're all caught up. I wasn't sure what the plan was going to be for this podcast, and I'm going to tell you that it's going to be low priority to some degree, especially right now. Like, my life is in shambles to a degree. We're going to figure it out. I'm going to keep doing it. I thought maybe 2 days a week, maybe 1 day a week. We'll see as necessary, as time allows. The reality is I got to focus on stand-up comedy. I make money doing stand-up. I need to write a new act. I need to really put my time and effort into that. And that includes like making clips. And I'll tell you guys this. I'm not going to make a big, like every day I got to update everyone. My goal, this is my goal for 2025 is 200 stand-up reels in 2025. So I have a bunch of stuff that's already been recorded. I'll pull from that, new stuff that happens, whatever, retreads even. But we're going to try to build a following this year, and that's going to include 200 stand-up reels in 2025. So follow me on Instagram, Casey McLean Comedy, all that stuff. Now I'd like to talk about Seattle sports. That's another thing, by the way. We're just going to talk about Seattle sports on this podcast. If the name hasn't changed yet, it probably has not. It's going to be called Poor Sports Seattle. Eventually, we're just going to talk about Seattle sports. So please come and enjoy that. Also, this is pre-recorded because there's a decent chance I'm going to have to cough multiple times through it, and I was not confident in live streaming, but I do think I want to get back to that. Live streaming this podcast, at least on Mondays. So come here for that. That'll be fun. Okay. We will move on now to a couple different Seattle sports topics. One of which is the Mariners still have yet to do anything. And actually, this is semi-breaking news as I record this. Hee-Sung Kim, who is the Korean infielder that I had talked about earlier in the offseason, one of the guys that gave you a little bit of hope. Like if the Mariners come out of this offseason with Hee-Sung Kim and Roki Sasaki, you're like, well, that's a pretty good value and pretty good offseason, frankly. You know, you fill these two spots with young, talented, controllable guys that would be towards the top of prospects list, probably. That would have been pretty exciting. Obviously, one's off the board. I think the Roki Sasaki stuff it's going to take a while. I want to say I heard, like, I can't remember what the reason was. I've been in a feverish delirium, but I want to say that he's not going to sign until the estimation is like mid-January. So we got a little while to wait on that. Maybe that's when his posting is official. I don't know what the reason is. We'll find out at some point. We got another podcast before then, at least one. There we go. There we go. And then also, I'm not going to edit it out, but it's not a coughing fit. I was worried about a coughing fit. Okay. So yeah, I mean the Mariners, I don't know how many times we can repeat this in the offseason. They haven't done anything. They're running out of options. I think Pete Alonso's still around, but I don't know if that's the guy you want. If you can get Pete Alonso on a 1-year deal, if you can get him on a prove it deal, I don't know why he would do that deal in a place where it's really, really, really difficult to hit home runs as a right-handed first baseman. But if you could somehow convince him to come, and Pete Alonso, by the way, I'm going to just double check for the sake of my, because I've just been so buried in, yeah, okay, he's still a free agent. Yeah, so I don't know what's left that's realistic. If Pete Alonso's realistic, I think that, based on what's left out there, he's probably the best option. Not my first choice. It would certainly depend on the price, whether I'd like it or not, but here we are. And also the Mariners, it was revealed that they didn't make the Luis Castillo to Boston trade because Boston also wanted them to take on, what's this guy's name? Oh, come on. What is his name? Oh, God. Boston, Japanese DH. Whatever that guy's name is. Yeah. Masataka Yoshida. A guy that's like a DH only and was making a little bit less money than Luis Castillo, but not that much less. To me, I understand the reason for it. It's like if they were trying to move on from Castillo so they could open up a little bit of salary relief, yeah, that would negate that. Tristan Cassis is a very good player, was a very good prospect, is a major league level prospect. To the idea that you wouldn't expect to take on some salary to trade an expensive player, albeit a guy that's not on like an incredibly team unfriendly deal. Yeah, that's the deal. I don't know. You're this is the hazard, by the way, is you're a team that's trying to cut every corner. And the hazard of that, of course, is you're left not making deals that would like almost unarguably make the team better. In two spots, by the way, Yamamoto or Yoshida's probably a better Yamamoto. My God, he's probably a guy that's going to make your DH spot better, and and Cass is going to make first base better. But you can't do it because it costs a little bit of money, and you don't have a little bit of money. You have essentially $0 because you have to hold some money for Roki Sasaki, and they seem to be unwilling to borrow against the future. So anyway, I would say frankly, like, let's say they sign Roki Sasaki, my tune might be a little different. I don't. Let's see. Is there odds on that? Is there odds on Roki Sasaki next team odds? You may not like odds, and there's going to be people who are just like, well, it doesn't matter because it's just whatever. It's a one, But the odds are usually a wisdom of the crowd thing that is somewhat reliable, more reliable than you might expect. What are those? Give me those odds, folks. I just want the odds. Just show me the goddamn odds. On bookies.com, and as of December 9th, so this is going to be a little bit dated. The Mariners aren't even in the list, by the way. They're part of the field, which is plus 1,500. The Dodgers, the Padres, the Yankees, the Mets, the Red Sox, the Cubs, the Phillies, and the Rays are all significantly higher. The Dodgers at the time had implied odds of 25% to sign Sasaki. So I would say, like, it seems very likely this offseason is going to be a total bust for the Mariners. And we'll talk about that more as the time moves along. I would say that the deals that the first baseman signed, if the Mariners could truly only spend $15 million, obviously those guys were out of their price range. And so if that's the deal, if you're not going to go get an impact bat, and Alex Bregman's still out there. I know. Is that right? Bregman is still out there, right? But he's what? He's a Boris client. He's never going. He's gonna be. It's gonna be tough. So, uh, what I would say is it's probably gonna be a bust of an offseason for the Mariners. And if you're gonna bust, but it's like when you play what's that game? Hearts. Like if you're gonna bust hard. Shoot the moon is what you would do in Hearts because, uh, yeah, let these guys develop. Don't give up a bunch of prospects. I'm not really on the team that wants them to trade a bunch of prospects. If you look at any effective rebuild, if you look at any one of these teams that's been a smaller or mid-market team that's remained competitive for years, it's because they don't go completely tear down their farm system to try to win 1 year when they're a fringe playoff team. And I understand there's all these superlatives that people will throw out about what the Mariners need to do because of their decades of mediocrity, and fine. I'm willing to be frustrated about that, but I'm not necessarily willing to make a stupid decision because I'm angry or because I'm frustrated or impatient. So, real quick, hold on, folks. We're getting there. Okay, so now I want to talk about. I want to end the podcast talking about Geno Smith. So I'm trying to get every single thing out of the way before then. And the last two things I think I have to talk about are the end of the Arizona State Texas game, and not so much the end, but the targeting penalty, because that was potentially a game-changing targeting penalty, and I think we need to. My opinion. I guess it like furthers my opinion of reviews, where I think we should be able to review. I think football should be able to review any penalty or non-call that would have resulted in a personal foul. I think every personal foul should be reviewable. I think pass interference should be reviewable, by the way, because it's such a huge penalty. It's such a game-changing penalty. And I thought that was so obviously targeting, and it makes Arizona State punt after. And there's been a lot of discourse on it, of course, but it's like that kind of, to a degree, you could say that cost Arizona State the game. Maybe that's not exactly true. Maybe if somebody's gone through the sequence of how it ended, and of course none of this stuff happens in a vacuum, and the whole game would have been different if that targeting penalty had happened. But it was a critical spot for Arizona State to not get a first down and have to punt, and they did. And then Texas goes on to win, and Texas is probably the better team. And I will say, after a pretty mediocre first round, or not even mediocre, a bad first round of playoff matchups, this second round has been a little more intriguing. Maybe not if you're not someone that hates Oregon, like I am, but it's been fun, and it's going to continue to be more fun. I'm happy there's the expanded playoff. I think anything beyond 16 will be too much. And I think, like I've said it on this podcast many times, I think we're probably headed towards some sort of like west, east, north, south super conferences that are no longer Big Ten. I mean, they'll probably get swallowed up into Big Ten is this, and SEC is this. Like SEC is the South Conference, and the whatever becomes this conference. And there's no. By the way, Pac-12 is never coming back, but where it becomes like these 4 16-team super conferences with a 16-team playoff, and the other teams are just kind of shit out of luck. I think that's like probably where we're headed. And I kind of hope we just get there faster. And maybe it's just because I want the finality, but so the Huskies, no, by the way, this is the only podcast where anyone might consider caring about how the Huskies played in the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl, which was the only thing my daughter sat and watched because she wanted to see all the Tony the Tiger commercials. The Huskies, they make a controversial 2-point conversion attempt at the end of the game, and I'm I think we've gone too far with the 2-point conversion stuff. I'm as pro analytics as anyone. I would say I'm a radical pro analytics person. Um, I know in the NFL, like this year, the 2-point conversion success rate's like 40% league wide. Now you can look at individual teams, like I think Washington has like an 80% 2-point conversion success rate, but it's in 5 iterations. Like it's not enough data to suggest that Washington is like multiple standard deviations better than the average team. It's sequencing, it's luck, it's happenstance, it's whatever thing. Also being a talented team. It's not to say there isn't any talent involved, but if the average team is a 40% 2-point conversion rate, the average team also, by the way, has a 95% chance of making their extra point. You should to do the to win the game extra point, or the like two scores down mid, these like kind of like we've pushed there's like obvious times. I'm gonna stop rambling a little bit. If you're down 10 with the choice between an extra point and a non-extra point, the answer is obvious. Score the extra point. If you need 15 points and you score a touchdown, my opinion is kick that extra point. Or sorry, no, that's not what I'm saying. Because teams seem to like play to preserve the chance to win, as opposed to giving themselves the best chance to win, which is slightly different in this case, because if you are going to miss an extra point and fail to convert, if you're going to make an extra point and fail to convert a 2-point conversion, you would rather know that you're going to fail to convert that 2-point attempt early so you can try to play for 2 additional possessions instead of 1 additional possession. So if you're down 15, go for 2 early. Go for 2 on the first touchdown. To me, that seems obvious, and it's not something teams have been very good at. But we're getting into this time where it's like you're down 8, and you're probably going to get 1 more possession in the game, and the teams are going for 2 because it's like there's some chart that says they should do it, but it seems that data is based on the idea that teams typically convert at about a 55% rate, which is kind of been conventional wisdom for a while. But... and also, by the way, this is really only a conversation, or is more of a conversation now, because even though it's a 95% success rate, the extra point used to be like 99 plus or maybe 98 plus. But so that brought the threshold of what the 2-point conversion success rate needed to be for it to make sense down. And so I think we've reached a point in the NFL specifically where teams are attempting 2-point conversions too often. And we can do a little more study on this. There's plenty of time in the offseason. It's not the most exciting thing. The Huskies get to the end of the game, and Damon Williams, freshman quarterback, has played very well throughout the game. Giles Jackson went off. Giles Jackson, I think is going to be it's going to be a question of, are Denzel Boston and Giles Jackson as good as maybe neither one is as good as Rome Odunze, but are they as good as Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk going into 2025? I guess are they actually both going to be there also, by the way? That's a new frontier we obviously have to deal with as college sports fans. But they go for 2 there at the end of the game and they miss it. And then, by the way, what's the Washington kicker's name? No, not that Washington. University of Grady Gross. Grady Gross ends up kicking the best onside kick I've seen in years. The Huskies legally touched the ball past 10 yards, which never happens. It's always either it hits an opposing player or they touch it too early. Those are the 2 ways that you seem to see the offense even get their hands on the ball. So beautiful onside kick. It does help, by the way, to have the extra space on the far hash. I will acknowledge that, but just a beautiful, beautiful onside kick that they don't recover. But they had gone for two, and here's what I'll say: Damon Williams played a great game. You get down inside the 10-yard line on that final sequence, and it took like 7 plays. I think it took legit 7 plays, didn't it? To get the ball into the end zone. And it was, even then, it was like a fight. It was a struggle. And so then the idea that you're just going to go very easily gain 10 yards and a 2-point conversion, it not only did it, by the way, it robbed Huskies fans of a much more entertaining scenario where they maybe go back and forth with Louisville and play additional overtimes and get more reps, and you see more of Damon Williams. You see more of what the offense is going to look like next year. If you're a coach, I would think it would even be valuable to get more in-game reps. Like, to me, even if you take away the part where it's like it's the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl, who gives a shit? It's in El Paso, nobody cares. If you take away that part, this is good in-game experience for your quarterbacks and for your young offensive players, for your young players. Period. Yeah, that seemed like a pretty obvious mistake, an unforced error on Jedd Fisch. And I'll tell you, like, I expected this team probably to go like 8-4 and then play in a bowl, so maybe be 8-5 or 9-4. They obviously did not do that. I will tell you, like, I just feel like this constant with the Huskies. I feel a constant, just like, I'm ready to like move on to what's next. It's not that I think Jedd Fisch is a bad coach. It just seems so obvious he's going to be gone in a couple of years that I'm like, I just want to see what's next. Like, what's beyond Jedd Fisch? Because I just don't imagine. I mean, my genuine belief is that Jedd Fisch is gone after next season. If the Huskies have any success, I think Jedd Fisch is gone after next season. All right. So now let's talk about the Seahawks and Geno Smith. The Seahawks, they beat the Bears. That was the 26th, right? I spent most of that game asleep, recovering from what it maybe or maybe was not the old C word that you're not supposed to say on YouTube that I've probably already said. I think you could make a pretty strong argument, by the way, that the Seahawks would have been better off losing that game because they did not need to win that game to beat the Rams. They needed the Cardinals to beat the Rams. Beyond that, they needed like so much help that it was almost pointless. The Bears added almost nothing to strength of victory. They're a very bad team. And so basically what the Seahawks lost by winning that game is draft position. And what they also potentially lost, I will say, is they have this problem with Geno Smith that's kind of just come to light in the last 24 hours, or it's like people have just started talking about it, which is that he's got about $6 million in incentives that could kick in if he has a good game on Sunday. If he wins 10 games as a starter, they would have to pay him $2 additional million. I think he's got a yardage threshold that's like 187 away. That's another $2 million, and then maybe a completion percentage threshold that is in reach also. So potential for $6 million in additional salary for Geno Smith, which there's just no version of that helps the Seahawks. And the Seahawks are, for all intents and purposes, or I think they're officially eliminated from the playoffs. And so the Seahawks probably have to make a move that's the best for the team, which is to not run the risk of spending that $6 million extra dollars on Geno Smith for the same guy as they have on the roster right now. They probably should see what they have in Sam Howell, see if he's anything, see what they have in Jaron Hall. to see if he's anything. And unfortunately, because they're one game away from these thresholds mattering, from Geno Smith's perspective, this could look like they're just simply benching him to avoid paying these incentives. And I don't know that there's a good, like, I understand how that's probably not true, or it's I think that at the very minimum, at the very maximum, I think that, like, I don't think that if the Seahawks had a chance to make the playoffs, that Geno would sit. Like, he's the best option on the roster as of right now. But I think it's the only real logical choice for the team to make, is to bench Geno for this game, to see what you have in Sam Howell, to see what you have in Jaron Hall, and to not pay Geno that extra $6 million. And that could very well make the decision for you, or at least help make the decision on what you do with Geno in the offseason, because if Geno gets pissed off, if Geno becomes if he becomes a problem because of this, if he becomes discontent and wants out of Seattle, well, that might force your hand a little bit, because Geno's at the end of his deal. And solving the relationship problem with Geno Smith probably isn't very high on the priority list if you've decided, and at this point, I think the Seahawks maybe probably already have a decision whether or not they want to keep Geno Smith, or they certainly don't seem to be super interested in extending Geno Smith, because he's been approaching this final year of his contract, and we haven't seen a lot of talk about it. I would imagine he goes into next season and holds out, and then I think you start to talk about a guy that's on like a veteran deal and what that means for the team, and how they can save $25 million against the cap if they release him. And it's a guy that, if he's going to be a malcontent and a guy that hasn't played incredibly well in the second half of this season, I think, like, Geno starts to lose leverage also. And then the Seahawks have to do something to replace him. Now, I think they're in a, if the Seahawks, let's say the Seahawks were in a scenario where they had like a top 5 pick, and there were several quarterbacks available, and they had the opportunity to draft a young quarterback, let him sit behind Geno Smith for 1 year while Geno's still under contract, try to make the playoffs that year, try to give Geno a platform year to go out and sign a free agent deal somewhere else, or maybe you could franchise him and trade him. That could have been a perfect poetic scenario. It's probably not what's going to happen here, because the Seahawks don't have a top 5 pick. This is not a strong quarterback class. There's 2 quarterbacks who are considered like a little bit of a reach, but likely to go in the top 5 picks, and that's Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. And first off, the Seahawks don't have the draft capital to trade up. It's not going to happen. There's just and there's teams that are up there that want those guys. And the other thing I'll say is, if those guys don't make it, don't get drafted in the top 5 overall, and based on what I've heard about the way the league views them and where they expect them to go, that probably means something went very bad in the draft process, in the draft lead up, and you may not want those guys in Seattle anyway. So I would take Cam Ward and I would take Shedeur Sanders off the menu. The top tier rookie options are gone. And so if you're going to replace Geno Smith, you're going to have to turn to something else. And people are making, by the way, there's a couple, I think, like, misnomers about why you would replace Geno Smith. And the one that I've found the most frustrating is people go, he needs to be held accountable for those red zone picks. There's no accountability in the way that you have accountability, like you get suspended with pay or whatever at work. That's not how accountability works in the NFL. He gets held accountable by whether or not he plays and gets paid, right? So if your argument is that because he did these things, he deserves, you need a pound of flesh to feel good, just short-sighted. Like, what you should want, what I want, is the Seahawks to make the best decision for the future of the franchise, short-term and long-term. I think there's a very strong chance as we go through these options and consider everything that's involved, Geno Smith is the best option for 2025. It's not because I'm some Geno defender. It's not because I'm not one of these guys that thought Geno was a top 5 quarterback in the NFL before the season. These delusions of grandeur that Seahawks fans have, that Geno Smith was at some point some elite guy. He is, I will say, he pops on some stats that you would be surprised by. But I'm not a guy that's like out here blindly defending Geno Smith. And so I want to talk about the options that they have. And the first is like I'd like to see him draft a young quarterback either way. The fact that guy is probably going to come in the second round or later makes me think that they also need to go sign someone to, if not compete with Geno, to replace Geno potentially. And these are the guys that are, I think, make sense to be those guys. That's who I'd like to talk about, because there's a lot of guys in the draft I like, actually, as like project, as lottery ticket quarterbacks. I like Quinn Ewers. I like Curtis Rourke. The Drew Aller kid it sounds like he's going back to Penn State. I'm like coming around on Jalen Milroe. If you can get him in the second round, I'd be pretty stoked about Jalen Milroe as a project and as a guy also, by the way, that you could bring in packages in his rookie year. Yeah, these are guys, like, I think those guys are interesting, and I don't think it's like you can't draft a quarterback. I just don't think you can draft a quarterback and then wipe your. There's no quarterback that will be available when the Seahawks draft that you can go, well, that's it, we did it. Now just start developing. Like, they need multiple options. And that's what the Seahawks have been very good at, by the way. As much as you can criticize them for not replacing Russell Wilson, well, if you feel that way, I actually think Geno Smith has ended up being, because the Seahawks had a pretty big dead cap number when they traded Russell Wilson also, and they've had some budget constraints in the last couple of years, and Geno Smith was a better replacement than I could have expected by far. Anyway, so these are those guys. Sam Howell's on the roster. You're going to see what you have in Sam Howell. You're going to see what you have in Jaren Hall, right? Like, these two guys. Jaren Hall's a bit more of an unknown. I liked him as a draft prospect, but he was an old quarterback, played at BYU, went on a Mormon mission. He's mobile. Anytime someone is short and has a decent arm, they're going to be compared to Russell Wilson for the next couple decades. He's got Wilson-like traits to me. He's also like kind of stocky build, probably not as stocky as Russell Wilson. I will say also, the first time I watched him play in the NFL, I watched when he came in. Maybe it was his first start in Minnesota, and he got a concussion trying to run a ball into the end zone. So, yeah, I mean, he has not had the injury luck that Russell Wilson had early in his career, obviously. Yeah, I would like to see, because, like I said, I'd like to see what the Seahawks have in those guys. I'd like them to find out what they have in those guys on Sunday. Beyond that, there's, I think, one interesting scenario before we get into, because one thing that's worth talking about is how the Seahawks ended up with Geno Smith and how the Vikings ended up with Sam Darnold. Because these two things happened in very different ways. Geno Smith was a guy where it was like, I kept saying, like, Geno Smith is not the future of this team. Like, draft a guy, develop a backup. Why are they sticking with Geno Smith every year? And then it turns out the guy was, like, you know, sneakily a very good backup quarterback and sneakily a very serviceable NFL starter in his mid-30s. Sam Darnold was different. The Vikings, they let Kirk Cousins walk after an Achilles tear that made it impossible for them to, and they had like huge financial constraints also, by the way, significantly worse than the Seahawks, who, by the way, the Seahawks are not in a position where they have like a ton of cap space. And of course you can do a bunch of stuff that gets teams in trouble where you keep mortgaging shit to the future. And yes, the Seahawks can technically clear a bunch of space if they trade DK Metcalf and cut Tyler Lockett and cut Draymond Jones and cut Geno Smith. You can get to whatever amount of cap space you want, but you still have a bunch of dead cap that pushes into the future, and you create a problem for yourself in the future. To me, the Seahawks need to take their medicine soon so that when they have a young quarterback in place, it's not a situation where they actually don't get to take advantage of the low cap number quarterback because they've got so many outstanding dead cap hits that it severely diminishes their cap space. So the Vikings found themselves in that spot in the offseason, and they drafted J.J. McCarthy, and they signed Sam Darnold as like an insurance policy. I think he makes like $10 million a year, and a guy that's like, he's been around the league, he's got a little bit of upside, but he's a guy that's going to come in and be serviceable. And Kevin O'Connell seems to have confidence in his ability to develop quarterbacks. He helped Kirk Cousins reach a new height, you could argue, and now he has helped Sam Darnold become the premier free agent quarterback this offseason. And I mean, that's hard to argue about, by the way. There's like nothing. We're going to talk about it, but there's nothing. It's not like you can go out and find a ready-made quarterback every offseason. And by the way, like a couple years ago, you may recall Baker Mayfield was out there. Jimmy Garoppolo was out there. There was another guy that was out there. Derek Carr was out there, I believe, the same offseason. Geno Smith was out there, and nobody was like, oh, Baker Mayfield, that's the guy. That's definitely the guy. He's definitely going to become a starter, a Pro Bowler, for sure. And it's arguable, by the way, that he hasn't actually been that much better overall than Geno Smith. I mean, this year he's had a pretty good year, I will say. But, like, the projection at the time, I think that's the important thing to remember, is that we're talking about projection. You're not going to go find in any of these circumstances a finished product. The closest is Sam Darnold, a guy who is entering his late 20s, who came up with a bunch of prospect type and then bounced all over the place after failing in New York and finally made it to a place where the coach apparently understands his game, or his game matches the coach's game plan, and he's had a very good 2024 season. Now, does Sam Darnold match Ryan Grubb's offense? Also, I want to say, you got to give Ryan Grubb a chance to put a quarterback that he chooses, that he has influence over the selection of, into his offense before you fire him. People want him fired already. Give the man an offseason, please. So a lot of this offseason and what teams that are looking for quarterbacks have to wait for is what happens with Sam Darnold. Because if the Vikings choose to keep Sam Darnold, it might shake J.J. McCarthy available. And the Seahawks were, I think, like rumored pretty early on to be interested in J.J. McCarthy last draft season. And to me, I mean, don't get me wrong, you're not getting a discount on J.J. McCarthy. McCarthy missed the whole season with a I believe it was a knee injury, but you're not getting a discount. You're giving up that first round pick, guaranteed. That first round pick's going to Minnesota if you're going to get J.J. McCarthy. Now, if you think you need a quarterback that bad, and you would have happily spent, I think the Seahawks are at the 18th pick right now. We'll see where they finally shake out to. If you'd have happily spent that pick on a quarterback of J.J. McCarthy's talent level, who, by the way, would be, I think by most people's estimation, easily the number one quarterback prospect in this draft, yeah, you give him that first round pick. You might give him the first round pick plus. I don't know if they're going to be willing to do that. My suspicion is, if I was going to guess, it's that Kevin O'Connell thinks he can coach J.J. McCarthy to be as good as Sam Darnold. And they'll let Sam Darnold walk. Maybe they'll franchise him and try to trade him for something. And then once they get into that, by the way, when they start getting into franchising and trading Sam Darnold, it stops being just, oh, Sam Darnold's probably going to make 4 years, $160 million, or whatever the new Baker Mayfield contract will be, which is he's played better than Baker Mayfield did, so it'll probably even be a little bit better than that. If it's 4-160, if it's the Derek Carr deal, which I think was 4-160, if it's a little bit better than that, Sam Darnold's going to be expensive. Are the Vikings going to be the ones to pay it? I don't know, but he's going to be expensive. If J.J. McCarthy's the guy that shakes away from that, I would like the Seahawks to be exploring that. And I don't care if they have to give up their first pick in this year's draft, because if you believe that J.J. McCarthy is as good as he was, he's certainly worth the first pick and then some. And we're going to get into all the stuff, by the way, like there's probably some opportunities to maybe run like a three-way thing or to trade a guy like DK Metcalf. for some picks and then use those picks to acquire McCarthy or whatever. I don't think the Vikings are going to be acquiring another high-priced receiver, but there's other options on how to get there, but we don't need to dig into that right now. The next option is, of course, is when the Vikings signed Sam Darnold, he wasn't Sam Darnold as we know him now, right? He was a retread. He was a guy that you're like, why would you be spending that much money on a guy? Why would you be spending that much money on a Marcus Mariota or a Mac Jones when you have a young quarterback, right? Well, these guys are going to be free agents again, and you have an opportunity to go try to find the quote unquote next Sam Darnold. So this is the list of those guys that I found, and you can decide if there's certainly probably more of them, but is any one of these guys going to be the next Sam Darnold? Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, Jared Stidham, Mac Jones, Trey Lance. I like some things about some of those guys. I think Zach Wilson is interesting. I think Justin Fields is interesting. I would have been interested in Justin Fields this offseason. We talked about it a bunch on the podcast. I'm not a big Mac Jones guy, but I would say I would defer to Ryan Grubb if he liked him. I think Mac Jones is probably more comparable. Like if you were looking at the archetype of a Ryan Grubb quarterback, the two that we have at high levels of college football are Michael Penix and Jake Haener. I think Mac Jones is clearly a Jake Haener type. Trey Lance, Justin Fields don't really fit into either. Like Penix is a very athletic guy, but is not a super mobile guy. I think Zach Wilson and to a degree Jared Stidham are better Penix comps than they are Haener comps. And then but again, none of these guys do you go like, oh, well, move on from the quarterback position then. No need to continue to acquire talent at the quarterback position if you've brought in Zach Wilson, if you've brought in Justin Fields. Now, if you trade for Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy, I think you can go, okay, well, let's go find that guy's backup. But you sign Zach Wilson, you're not handing the reins to Zach Wilson. And then the guys that are veterans, these are your options. These are not exciting options. Joe Flacco, Jimmy Garoppolo, Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, Carson Wentz. These guys are exciting? No, these are all at best like 1-year bridge guys also. So I think there's a pretty strong chance because the Seahawks probably don't have – I don't want the Seahawks to sign Sam Darnold, I guess would be what I would say, because Sam Darnold's probably going to make $40 million and the Seahawks are going to be on the hook for $13.5 million for Geno Smith. And I just don't think that the gap between Geno Smith and Sam Darnold is big enough to justify going from a $38 million cap hit in that spot to potentially like a $55 million cap hit. And the guy you have at the end of that cap hit is Sam Darnold. Maybe that's cynical. Maybe that's wrong. You can disagree with me. Please comment if you disagree with me. But to me, and the football's it's not my money sport because there's a cap. There's a finite amount of money that the team can spend. And like I said, they can push money into the future and all that crap. But the longer you do that, eventually you're going to have a young quarterback. You're going to have a situation like a Tom Brady, a Drew Brees situation where these guys are like, yeah, dude, I'm not going to win for like another 6 years because you've completely fucked us going into the future. And I just can't be. And Brady in particular was like taking less money to try to keep the team in a good cap spot. So I think McCarthy's interesting. I don't know that there's another guy that, you know what? There's one other guy that I was thinking of that maybe would make some sense. He was drafted 2 years ago. I think Will Levis's time in Tennessee is probably over. But again, I want to make clear that Will Levis, first off, he would need a trade to acquire Will Levis. I don't think Tennessee is going to cut Will Levis. But is Will Levis, is he better than Geno Smith? I don't know. Is there more upside? Yeah, certainly. He's quite a bit younger. He's cheaper. If you could acquire Will Levis for almost nothing, you just got to remember, nobody was excited about Sam Darnold. I know you're not excited about Will Levis. I know you're not excited about Mac Jones or Trey Lance or Zach Wilson or somebody like that. Justin Fields maybe is a little more exciting because he's had some success on multiple teams. But these are guys that, like, to me are there's no sure thing out there. The idea that different is certainly better or even likely better, I think, is inaccurate. But that being said, I think the Seahawks do need. They've also pushed themselves into this situation where they have no reason to play Geno Smith except to keep Geno Smith happy. How much is keeping Geno Smith happy worth at this point in his career and at this point in the Seahawks trajectory? I don't know. All right. Come see me this weekend. I'll be with Gabe Rutledge at Tacoma Comedy Club on Saturday. And then I'm going to be in Rockport, Washington on Thursday, on Whidbey Island at the Wicked Teton something brewing company in Oak Harbor on the following Thursday. Go to CaseyMcLeanComedy.com to see some dates. And yeah, thank you for listening to this podcast. I'm happy to be back, and I'll be, we're going to do as many as makes sense. I don't know how many that's going to be, but hopefully it's 2 a week. That would be great. And part of the deal is this podcast stopped growing, especially when Alex left. So tell a friend, subscribe, keep listening, please. Otherwise, it is going to go away, and it's not going to make it through 2025, which is not to guilt you. You've watched, and I appreciate it, and I love you. I love each and every one of you individually. So please, yeah, thank you, and Happy New Year, and I hope you had a good holiday season. And all right.